I'm Brooke, and I'm 29 years old. At my sister's wedding reception, there was a photo with my face and "Do not let this person enter" written underneath. I didn't argue. I just left. 4 hours later, she called screaming because she realized the wedding had completely fallen apart the exact moment I walked away. Looking back now, I can see the irony wasn't lost on anyone except my family. Here's the thing about being the invisible sister. You get really good at noticing details everyone else misses, like how the caterers kept glancing at their contracts, or how the venue coordinator looked increasingly nervous every time someone asked about payment schedules. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But let me backtrack and tell you how we got here, because this story isn't just about one humiliating moment. It's about 29 years of being the family's emergency fund with legs. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While my sister Madison was busy being the golden child, prom queen, cheerleader, the one who could do no wrong, I was in my room doing homework and working part-time jobs to save money for college. Madison never worked a day in high school. Why would she? Mom and Dad made sure she never had to worry about anything practical like money or consequences. When Madison announced her engagement to Trevor last spring, the whole family went into celebration mode. You'd think she'd discovered the cure for cancer instead of just finding a guy willing to put up with her drama. The wedding planning started immediately, and of course nobody bothered to ask about my schedule or plans. I was just expected to show up and play supporting cast to Madison's starring role. The first red flag should have been when Mom called me 3 weeks after the engagement announcement. "Brooke, honey, we need to talk about Madison's wedding budget. Not, can you help, or would you be willing?" Just a straight-up assumption that my money was their money. Turns out, Trevor's family wasn't as well off as Madison had believed, and my parents had overcommitted on everything from the venue to the catering. The shortfall was about $15,000, which might as well have been $15 million for my unemployed sister and barely getting by parents. "Family helps family," Dad said when I hesitated. It's funny how that phrase only ever seemed to apply to me helping them, never the other way around. So naturally, I said yes, because that's what I always did. I co-signed for the venue, put the catering deposit on my credit card, and even agreed to handle the florist payments. Madison hugged me and promised she'd pay me back after the honeymoon. We both knew she was lying, but pretending was easier than facing the truth. The planning process was like watching a masterclass in family dysfunction. Every decision had to be approved by Madison, of course, but somehow I ended up being the one who actually made things happen. When the original photographer canceled 2 months before the wedding, guess who spent her weekend calling around to find a replacement? When the venue said they needed additional insurance documentation, guess who handled the paperwork? Madison was too busy with her bachelorette party planning and dress fittings to deal with actual logistics. Mom was too stressed to handle vendor calls. Dad just wrote checks he couldn't cover and left me to figure out how to make them clear. The strangest part was how invisible I became during all of this. At family dinners, the conversation revolved entirely around Madison's wedding plans. When I tried to contribute ideas or mention concerns about the budget, I'd get polite nods followed immediately by someone changing the subject back to flower arrangements or seating charts. I started to feel like hired help instead of family. Actually, that's not quite right. I felt like unpaid help. At least hired staff get acknowledged for their work. 3 months before the wedding, Madison's attitude toward me started to shift. The grateful hugs disappeared. Our phone calls became short and businesslike. When I asked about repayment plans, she'd say we could figure it out later in a tone that suggested the conversation was beneath her. Then came the guest list meeting. Mom had called a family meeting to finalize invitations, which should have been a simple conversation about +1s and table arrangements. Instead, it turned into something much more revealing about where I stood in the family hierarchy. "I think we should keep things intimate," Madison announced, scrolling through her list. "Close family and friends only." "That makes sense," I agreed. "Smaller weddings are more meaningful anyway." Madison looked up from her notes with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. "Actually, Brooke, I've been meaning to talk to you about that." The room went silent in a way that made my stomach drop. "Talk to me about what?" I asked, though something in Madison's tone already had alarm bells ringing in my head. "About the wedding dynamic," Madison said carefully, like she'd practiced this speech. "Trevor's family is very traditional, very focused on family harmony. They've expressed some concerns about potential drama." I blinked. "What kind of drama?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look that told me this conversation had been planned without me. Mom cleared her throat. "Honey, you know how you can be sometimes. A little intense. Madison just wants her special day to be perfect." "How I can be," I repeated. "What does that even mean?" "You tend to make things about yourself," Madison said, not meeting my eyes. Like with my engagement party when you brought up your promotion at work, or my bridal shower when you kept talking about your new apartment, Trevor's family noticed. I felt like I'd been slapped. The engagement party incident she was referring to was when someone directly asked about my job, and I'd mentioned my promotion in passing. The bridal shower comment was even more absurd. I'd answered one question about where I was living now. Both conversations lasted maybe 2 minutes total. So what exactly are you suggesting? I asked, my voice steady despite the hurt building in my chest. Maybe it would be better if you didn't come to the ceremony, Dad said. You could join us for the reception afterward once the formal part is over. The formal part that I'd helped pay for. The ceremony that wouldn't be happening without my credit cards covering the deposits. The wedding that existed because I'd co-signed documents and personally guaranteed vendor payments. I looked around the room at my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and realized they'd made this decision together, without me. I wasn't a family member expressing an opinion. I was a problem they'd collectively decided to solve. I see, I said quietly. And you all agreed on this? The silence was answer enough. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize your family sees you completely differently than you see yourself? Drop a comment below if you've ever been blindsided by people you trusted. The next part of this story gets even more unbelievable. 2 weeks later, I got the official invitation in the mail. It was beautiful. Cream cardstock with elegant calligraphy, the kind of invitation that screams expensive taste. My name was on it, along with reception only 6 p.m. in smaller print at the bottom. I stared at that invitation for a long time, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the vendor payment schedules I'd been managing for months. The irony was almost funny. I was personally responsible for about 60% of the wedding budget, but I wasn't welcome at the actual ceremony. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I called my cousin Rachel, someone I barely spoke to anymore, and asked her straight out, "What has Madison been telling people about me?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Brooke, I probably shouldn't repeat this, but she's been saying you're jealous of her engagement, that you've been trying to control the wedding planning because you can't stand seeing her happy." "Jealous," I repeated. "Right. She told everyone at the bridal shower that you've been making passive-aggressive comments about Trevor and trying to turn the family against them. She said you're bitter because you're still single." I hung up the phone and walked to my bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized anymore. Tired, defeated, smaller somehow, like I'd been physically shrinking under the weight of my family's expectations and criticism. But as I stood there, something shifted. Maybe it was finally seeing the situation clearly, or maybe I'd just reached my breaking point. Either way, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and started making a list. Every vendor I'd contacted personally, every contract I'd signed or co-signed, every payment I'd made or guaranteed. The list was longer than I'd realized. Then I picked up my phone and started making calls. "Hi, this is Brooke Thompson. I need to make some changes to the Peterson-Williams wedding arrangements." It took 3 hours to work through my entire list. Venue coordinator, caterer, florist, photographer, DJ, cake decorator. Each conversation was professional and polite. I simply explained that due to family circumstances, I needed to remove my name from all contracts and payment guarantees, effective immediately. Some vendors were understanding. Others were less thrilled about having their payment security pulled 3 weeks before the event. But legally, they couldn't stop me from withdrawing my personal guarantees, especially since I hadn't been officially designated as financially responsible by the actual bride and groom. By midnight, I was no longer legally or financially connected to Madison's wedding in any way. The next 3 weeks passed in strange calm. Madison called a few times to discuss last-minute details, and I played along. I didn't mention the vendor calls or the contract changes. When she asked about payment schedules, I just said everything was handled, which was technically true. What struck me most was how none of them had bothered to learn any actual details about the wedding logistics. Madison knew what time her hair appointment was and what shoes she was wearing, but she had no idea who was catering the reception or what the cancellation policy was for the venue. Mom would call to chat about family arriving from out of town, completely unaware that the hotel block I'd arranged was no longer guaranteed. Dad mentioned being excited about the band, not realizing I'd been the only one in contact with them for the past 4 months. They'd been so focused on excluding me from the ceremony while still expecting me to handle all the behind-the-scenes work that they hadn't noticed I'd stepped back from everything. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and drizzly. I got dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that was elegant but not attention-grabbing. Despite everything, some part of me still hoped this could be salvaged. Maybe showing up with grace and maturity would remind them that I was family, not the problem they'd made me out to be. I drove to the venue slowly, practicing what I'd say if anyone questioned my presence. I'd be polite but dignified. I wouldn't cause a scene or make demands. I'd simply attend the reception as invited and try to support my sister despite how I'd been treated. The venue was beautiful. The gardens were perfectly landscaped, with white flowers everywhere and elegant seating arrangements visible through the windows. Cars filled the parking area. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. Trevor's family had definitely showed up in style. I walked toward the entrance, smoothing my dress and checking my purse for the invitation I'd brought as proof that I belonged there. A few relatives were gathering near the main doors, dressed in their wedding finest and chatting excitedly. That's when I saw it. Just to the right of the main entrance, mounted on an easel where every single guest would see it, was a large poster board with wedding information, ceremony times, reception details, special requests from the bride and groom, and right in the center, a photo of my face with text underneath in elegant script. Do not allow this person to enter. I stopped walking so abruptly that someone behind me almost bumped into me. My brain took a few seconds to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some misunderstanding or miscommunication. This was deliberate, planned. They'd taken the time to print my photo, mount it professionally, and place it where every guest would see it. The woman behind me followed my gaze and gasped audibly. "Oh my goodness, is that—" "Excuse me," I managed, stepping aside so she could pass. My first instinct was to march inside and demand an explanation, to find Madison and ask her how she could humiliate me this publicly, to confront my parents about how they could participate in something so cruel. But as I stood there, watching relatives and family friends see that poster and react with shock or uncomfortable laughter, something different happened. A strange calm settled over me. This wasn't really about the wedding anymore. This was about who my family had always seen me as, and who they'd finally felt comfortable revealing me to be in front of everyone who mattered to them. I wasn't the reliable sister who'd helped make this day possible. I was a threat to be managed, a problem to be solved, a person so unwelcome that they needed to post my photo like a wanted poster. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the sign. Then I walked back to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone to vent or seek comfort. I just sat in my apartment and started making more phone calls. "Hello, this is Brooke Thompson calling about the Peterson-Williams wedding scheduled for today." The first call was to the caterer. Professional, polite, matter-of-fact. Due to family circumstances, I needed to exercise the cancellation clause we'd discussed when I signed the contract. Yes, I understood there would be fees. Yes, I had the documentation. The second call was to the venue coordinator. Same conversation. My name was on the primary contract as guarantor. I was invoking the cancellation clause. They could work out alternative arrangements with the other parties if they chose to. One by one, I methodically undid months of planning and coordination. What do you think happened next? Drop your guesses in the comments below and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this family story ends. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, my sister's perfect wedding was falling apart in real time, and I was sitting in my apartment, finally understanding what it felt like to stop trying to save people who'd never once tried to save me. By 5:30, I was sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, wondering how long it would take for someone to notice. The wedding ceremony was scheduled to start at 6, with cocktail hour immediately following. The reception dinner was supposed to begin at 7:30. I'd timed everything carefully when I made those cancellation calls. The caterers would start breaking down their setup around 5:45. The venue coordinator would discover the contract issues around 6:15. The florist would get the cancellation notice right as guests were transitioning from ceremony to cocktail hour. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. No panicked calls yet. No frantic messages. They were probably all too busy with pre-ceremony photos and last-minute primping to notice that their perfect day was about to implode. I picked up a book I'd been trying to finish for months. Something I never had time for between work and family emergencies. For the first time in years, no one needed me to solve their problems or fix their mistakes or bankroll their dreams. The quiet felt strange, almost foreign. I'd grown so accustomed to the constant buzz of family obligations that the absence of demands felt like missing a limb. Around 6:15, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another unknown number. Then another. I smiled, imagining the chaos beginning to unfold. Vendors arriving to venues they no longer had contracts for. Caterers showing up to events that had been canceled. Coordinators scrambling to figure out how a wedding could exist without any of the actual services required to make it happen. The beautiful thing about revenge, I was learning, was that sometimes it didn't require any dramatic confrontations or angry speeches. Sometimes it just required stepping back and letting people experience the natural consequences of their choices. They'd decided I was the problem, so I'd simply removed myself from the equation. What do you think happened when the vendors started arriving? Share your predictions in the comments below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The meltdown that's coming is absolutely epic. The first call from someone I actually knew came at 6:47. Mom's number flashed on my screen, and I almost answered out of habit. Instead, I let it ring through to voicemail and waited to see what message she'd leave. "Brooke, honey, there's some confusion with the catering company. Can you call them and sort this out? Madison's getting stressed and we don't want to bother her right now." Even in the middle of a crisis, they still thought I'd drop everything to fix their problems. The assumption that I'd be available to clean up their mess was almost impressive in its complete tone deafness. I deleted the voicemail without calling back. 15 minutes later, Dad called. Then Madison, then Trevor, then Mom again. Each call went to voicemail, and each voicemail grew more frantic than the last. "Brooke, this isn't funny anymore. We need you to call the venue right now. The photographer says his contract was canceled. What's going on? Brooke, answer your damn phone. The whole reception is falling apart." I made myself another cup of tea and settled back into my book. Jane Austen, as it turned out, was excellent company for listening to your family's world crumble in the background. By 7:30, they'd apparently figured out that I wasn't going to rescue them. The calls stopped coming from family members and started coming from vendors who'd been given my number as an emergency contact. "Ms. Thompson, this is Sarah from Elegant Events Coordination. We're having some issues with the Peterson-Williams wedding contracts, and your family gave us your number." I answered that one, just to be helpful. "Oh, hi, Sarah. Yes, I canceled my involvement in that event this afternoon. You'll need to work directly with the bride and groom for any payment or contract issues going forward. But ma'am, your signature is on the primary venue guarantee. Without that guarantee, we can't—" "I understand," I said pleasantly. "That sounds like something they'll need to figure out with their families. I'm no longer involved. Have a great evening." I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in months. By 8 o'clock, my phone was buzzing constantly, not just from family, but from what sounded like increasingly desperate vendors, venue staff, and confused wedding guests. I turned the ringer off and went to take a long bath. The hot water felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. When was the last time I'd had an uninterrupted hour to myself without someone needing something? I couldn't even remember. I was just getting out of the tub when someone started pounding on my apartment door. Not knocking, pounding. Like the building was on fire and I needed to evacuate immediately. I wrapped myself in a robe and looked through the peephole. Trevor stood in the hallway, still in his wedding tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone and his hair disheveled. His face was red with anger and what looked like genuine panic. "Brooke, I know you're in there," he called through the door. "Open up. We need to talk." I almost laughed. We'd been to family dinners together for 3 years, and Trevor had never bothered to learn my last name. Now suddenly we needed to talk? "Sorry, Trevor," I called back. "I'm not dressed. Maybe try calling Madison's sister." "Oh wait, that's me. And I wasn't invited to the ceremony, remember?" The pounding stopped. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other side of the door. "Brooke, please, the whole wedding is ruined. Guests are leaving. Madison's crying. The venue is threatening to shut everything down because they don't have valid contracts." "That sounds really stressful," I said sympathetically. "Have you tried calling your family for help? I hear they're very traditional and focused on family harmony." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Money? An apology? Just tell me what it'll take to fix this." I leaned against the door, marveling at how different this conversation felt from every other family emergency I'd ever been asked to solve. For the first time in my adult life, someone was asking what I wanted instead of just expecting me to provide what they needed. "What I want," I said clearly, "is for you to go back to your wedding and figure it out yourselves. You know, like adults do." The silence that followed was so long I thought he'd left. Then I heard him kick something in the hallway before his footsteps faded toward the elevator. I was about to settle in for the night when my phone rang again. This time it was Madison, and something in my gut told me I should answer. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe I wanted to hear her finally acknowledge what she'd done. "Brooke," she said, and her voice was completely different from any tone I'd ever heard from her before. Raw, desperate, broken. "Hi, Madison," I said calmly. "How's married life treating you?" She started crying then. Not the delicate tears of a stressed bride, but ugly, gasping sobs that made her almost impossible to understand. "Everything's ruined," she choked out. "The caterers left. The venue coordinator says we owe them $15,000 immediately or they're shutting down the reception. Half the guests have already gone home. Trevor's family is furious. His mother is saying we deceived them about our financial situation." I listened without interrupting, genuinely curious to see where she was going with this. "I don't understand what happened," she continued. "Everything was supposed to be taken care of. You said everything was handled." "I said everything was handled," I agreed. "And it was. I handled removing myself from all the contracts and payment obligations. Very thoroughly. The crying stopped abruptly. You what? I canceled my involvement in your wedding 3 weeks ago, Madison. The same week you decided to post my photo at the entrance telling security not to let me in. But the deposits, the guarantees, you can't just… Actually, I can. And I did. Turns out when you're not legally part of the family being celebrated, you're also not legally obligated to fund the celebration. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Brooke, Madison said finally, her voice small and hollow. I need you to fix this, please. I'll pay you back everything, I promise. I'll apologize to everyone. Just please don't let my wedding be ruined over this. And there it was. The moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for my entire adult life. My family finally admitting they needed me. Finally asking instead of assuming. Finally acknowledging that I held power in this relationship. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt sad. Madison, I said gently, your wedding isn't being ruined over this. Your wedding is experiencing the natural consequences of your choices. My choices? Her voice started rising again. You're the one who sabotaged everything. I'm the one who removed my financial support from an event I wasn't welcome to attend. You're the one who chose to humiliate me publicly while still expecting me to bankroll your party. That sign wasn't supposed to… Trevor's family wanted… Oh God. Brooke, you don't understand. His mother has been looking for reasons to disapprove of me from day one. She never thought I was good enough for him. And when she sees this disaster… For the first time in our conversation, I heard something in Madison's voice I'd never heard before when she talked to me. Respect. Not the casual dismissal or patronizing tolerance I was used to, but actual awareness that her actions might have consequences she couldn't control. Madison, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said. For the past 6 years, every time your life got complicated, I've been your solution. When you couldn't make rent, I covered it. When you needed a cosigner for your car loan, I provided it. When your credit card debt got out of hand, I paid it off. I've spent over $40,000 making sure you never had to face the consequences of your decisions. She was quiet, probably adding up the numbers in her head for the first time. But consequences aren't actually bad things, Madison. They're learning opportunities. Tonight, you're learning that actions have results, that you can't treat people badly and still expect their help, that wedding planning requires actual planning, not just dreaming. So you're just going to let my marriage start off with this disaster? You're going to let Trevor's family think we're frauds? I'm not letting anything happen, I said. I'm simply not preventing it anymore. The distinction was important, and I could tell from her sharp intake of breath that she finally understood it. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. Whatever married couples do when they face their first major crisis together, I said. Figure it out. I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet apartment, processing what had just happened. For 29 years, I'd been the family's safety net, the person who absorbed problems and produced solutions, the one who made sure everyone else's lives ran smoothly, while mine remained perpetually on hold. Tonight, for the first time ever, I'd let them fall, and the strangest part was how calm I felt about it. No guilt, no urge to rush to their rescue, no desperate need to fix what they'd broken. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Rachel. Just heard about Madison's wedding disaster. Are you okay? I stared at that message for a long time. Was I okay? 3 hours ago, my sister's marriage had started with public humiliation and financial chaos. My parents were probably scrambling to figure out how to salvage their social reputation. Trevor's family was likely reconsidering their opinion of the entire Peterson clan. 6 months ago, this scenario would have sent me into a panic of guilt and self-recrimination. I would have been on the phone immediately, using my credit cards to book emergency caterers and begging vendors to accommodate last-minute changes. Instead, I was sitting peacefully in my apartment, reading a book and drinking tea. I'm more than okay, I texted back. I'm free. Over the following weeks, the family fallout unfolded exactly as dramatically as you'd expect. Madison and Trevor's marriage survived, but just barely. His family's opinion of our family's financial reliability was permanently damaged. My parents' social circle was treated to front-row seats to the consequences of their golden child's planning failures. The most interesting development was how quickly everyone's tune changed once they realized I wasn't coming back to fix things. Suddenly, family members who'd supported excluding me from the ceremony were calling to tell me how unfairly I'd been treated. Relatives who'd laughed at that entrance sign were reaching out to express their shock at how cruel it had been. Mom and Dad tried the guilt approach first, then moved on to anger, and finally settled into what I can only describe as bewildered acceptance that their family ATM had permanently closed. As for me, I started therapy, bought a house with the money I'd previously been spending on family emergencies, and began building relationships with people who valued what I offered instead of just taking what I provided. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when family tries to define your worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling them to treat you badly. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my home office, where I run a successful consulting business helping small family businesses manage their finances responsibly. It turns out all those years of managing my family's money problems actually taught me some valuable skills. Madison and I exchange Christmas cards now. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a relationship built on mutual respect for clear boundaries, rather than on her needs and my compliance. And you know what? We're both happier for it.